evening. My name is Imani Rupert Gordon, and I'm the Executive Director at Affinity Community Services. And Affinity is a social justice organization that works with Black LGBTQ women and other LGBTQ communities of color on the south side of Chicago. We've been doing this work for 22 years now, and we're really excited about doing our work intersectionally. It's our thought that by working with the most marginalized populations that the most people can benefit from. Now, before we get started, I want to thank Arifa for answering phones for us today. Arifa's been a long-time Affinity supporter, and we're happy to have her today. And our guest is Dr. Phoenix Matthews. Dr. Matthews is a clinical psychologist at the College of Nursing at the University of Chicago, Illinois. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here this evening. I'm really always happy to support Affinity and to talk about issues of relevance to the community.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you. So let's jump right in. Just to ground our listeners, can you share a bit about your professional background and any areas of expertise that you have?
Certainly. My training is as a clinical psychologist, so I have a PhD in clinical psychology, and my area of emphasis is health psychology, which means that my clinical work has been with health-impacted populations, primarily cancer patients and their family members, and all my research is associated with cancer prevention and control, those ways in which we can help to reduce the impact of cancer on underserved communities, in particular African American and LGBT communities.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you. And today we're going to be talking about bathroom access, specifically the Chicago Restroom Access Project, or CRAP as we affectionately call it.
Affectionately known as CRAP.
I love it. But I'm wondering if you can tell us about that project, what you're hoping to accomplish, and the reasons for having it.
Yes, absolutely. So the Chicago Restroom Access Project was really an organic and grassroots effort to bring a lot of key stakeholders together to address a really important issue to the community. So you may or may not be aware that individuals who are trans-identified or gender nonconforming have really negative instances of harassment in trying to access public restrooms. The reason that occurs is that people make a lot of assumptions based on appearance about which restrooms a person should or should not be in. And for individuals who are trans or gender nonconforming, being confronted with that when they're trying to just address a biological functioning can cause a great deal of stress and anxiety in their lives. So we came together, members of the academic community, social service and activists, members of the city government came together to talk about, well, what types of things are possible to do to reduce this specific type of stress among members of the LGBT community.
Thank you. So you mentioned both transgender, gender nonconforming. Can you sort of explain the difference? If someone identifies or introduces themselves as transgender, what does that mean, and how's that different from gender nonconforming?
Great. So let's first talk about gender, right? Everyone thinks they have a pretty clear understanding of gender, but there is actually a lot of confusion around that. So when many people think of gender, they're really talking about biological sex. That is, what the anatomy that you were born with, that you had at birth, right? So whether or not you are biologically male or biologically female, that's your sex. Many people say that that's also gender, but biology is not the same thing as gender. Gender is our self-perception or our ways of which we understand who we are as an individual in terms of our orientation towards masculinity and femininity. Unfortunately, in ours and many countries, there's a set of expectations that go, gender expectations, the way the person acts, presents themselves, that go along with sex, right? So if an individual has biologically is male sex, then there's a set of expectations that gender expectations that males do. Males are tough, they're this, they don't wear dresses, things like that. But gender is a social construct, meaning that what it means to be male or female varies dramatically from community to community and from culture to culture. And it, as we know, it changes over time. So that's the thing to keep in mind, is that gender is a social construct that changes over time. A person who is transgender is an individual who was born in one biological sex, male or female, but whose sense of themselves in terms of their gender is different from or opposite from their biological sex. So if I'm born as a biological female and I'm transgendered, that means I consider myself, or my gender experience of my gender is that of a masculine or male. Now, some people, when they identify as transgender, they may have take hormones or have other types of surgeries to do what they call gender affirming treatments. So those treatments that help to align their physical body with their internal sense of their own gender. Okay? Now that's not true for all transgendered individuals, just for a subset. Right? Now a person who's gender nonconforming, they may have a sense of themselves as, I'm born female, I identify as a female in terms of my gender, but I'm not wearing no dress. Right? The way that I present myself in the world is stereotypically more masculine, or the opposite of that can be true. And so there are people who don't want to be necessarily identified as any specific type of gender. They're what they refer to as non-binary or on the continuum. I'm happiest in terms of I just identify as a human being, separate from any particular type of gender or sex.
Gotcha. Great. So thank you so much for that detailed explanation. So you're saying basically your sex that's assigned to you at birth, which is typically male, female, or intersex,
Right.
Doesn't necessarily have to correspond to your gender identity. That's something that is a social construct, but also something that it's expressed in a variety of ways, like the way you dress, the way you talk, expectations, those sort of things.
Yes, absolutely
Great.
right. Yes.
Yes, thank you so much for
Okay.
all of that explanation. I appreciate it. You know, before we get back to crap, and I want to get back to it. I'm wondering, why are we hearing about gender and bathrooms right now in this moment? Is this something that's new, but it doesn't seem like it's new? I'm just wondering what's coming up right now that's making that come to the forefront of our collective attentions.
Yeah. I think it's building on the success of the LGBT, lesbian, gay, bisexual, civil rights achievements that people who are gender nonconforming or trans identified are asking more and requesting and receiving support for improved civil rights. And so there have been individuals throughout the course of history that have been gender nonconforming or even transgendered. There are famous instances in history where it's only been after an individual has died that a person finds out that that person is transgender, that they may have been living their lives as a male, but their physical body was that of a female. And so this is not a new phenomenon. Some people would have called tomboys in the past, and that could have encompassed very active girls, or it could have encompassed people who were more trans or gender nonconforming. So it's a phenomenon that's always been there, but with growing social acceptance and the civil rights of the lesbian, gay, and bisexual movements, transgender individuals are now coming out of the closet, if you will, and making requests for full social acceptance. So one of the things that is associated with full social acceptance is to be able to have one's life, their gender affirmed. And that means that if I identify as a female, then I would like to use female labeled public accommodations. And the most gendered public accommodation that we know of is the restrooms.
Gotcha.
Right, and so it's a source of some really stressful experiences and encounters, but it's also been the location of a lot of progressive legislation in recent years. And I can talk a little bit more about that. So Large cities, Washington, D.C., Boston, Philadelphia, San Francisco, Austin, they have changed their city codes or legislation to say that all single stalled restrooms that are currently gendered, meaning there's one toilet, there's one sink, one person uses it at a time, goes in, locks the door, does their business, and comes out. All those types of restrooms need to be what we're calling now gender neutral or non-gendered. So if it's in the past it's had male or female, it's just to say now restroom. And so that has a lot of positive benefits for the reasons that we've been talking about in terms of the trans and gender non-conforming communities. But it's also helpful for instances in terms of, that long line for the women's restroom that is very common in places when there are two people in line for the men's restroom. So it changes some of that dynamic, right? That increases access for women in general. It also is helpful for individuals who are care providers of an opposite sex, either older adult or child, and that person needs assistance in the restroom facilities. So there's a lot of reasons why changing our single-stalled gendered restrooms to gender neutral has positive benefits to the community at large, and also specifically to transgendered individuals. So the work of CRAP, Chicago Restroom Access Project, was really started in response to the national trends towards making single-stalled restrooms gender neutral. And so this grassroots coalition that I was mentioning before came together, and we started to talk about and plan how might we get this work done here in Chicago, right? So before we can think about making any policy changes or advocating for specific types of changes, we need to hear from members who are most impacted by that issue. And so initially we spent times with transgendered and gender non-conforming individuals, a community that I identify with. And we talked to members about their experiences, and their experiences, anecdotal experiences and lived experiences were very much consistent with what we see in the research literature about the extreme types of discrimination and harassment experienced by this community trying to access public restroom spaces. So that was the first thing we did. We put together an advisory group of trans-identified and gender non-conforming individuals. The second thing that we've been working on is that we wanted to reach out and talk with members of the service industry, the businesses and restaurants and bars owners, and public facilities that would be asked to make this type of change. And we wanted to hear back from them. To date, we have surveys collected for over 100 different businesses and restaurants in the Chicago area, and almost uniformly there is support for changing gendered single-stalled restrooms into gender neutral. The reasons that individuals see positive benefits are they live in areas in which there's a high proportion of LGBT community, or they have experiences with long waits for women, and just the feeling that there are no negative consequences of making this type of change to single-stalled restrooms. And so they've been very positive. So the last piece of the work that we're doing is specifically targeting the African American communities. We are doing a series of focus groups to be able to get a better understanding of experiences with trans and gender nonconforming communities, attitudes around restroom access as a civil rights issue for African Americans who are members of trans and gender nonconforming communities, and to try to come up with educational materials that would help to increase awareness and advocacies in our various communities. So that's the work that we're doing now. One of the things that is particularly problematic with LGBT civil rights issues is that there has been a tendency not to engage with communities of color, specifically African American and Latino. And consequently, when the communities don't vote affirmatively for legislations and bills, that there's a tendency to blame the communities. Well, in actuality, the community hasn't been educated, asked to partner, and to be brought on board with the initiatives. And so we don't want to make that same type of mistake here as we think about improving circumstances here for restroom access.
Oh, that's great. Thank
Yeah.
you. So many questions, but I want to start. So, right now, what has been sort of accomplishments? What feels good about what you've done so far?
Right. So several things feel really phenomenal. The first is that last year, during the Creating Change Conference, which is a national LGBT social justice convening, was located here in Chicago. And the group of us at the CRAP group were sitting together and we said, well, the restroom signs should look like this, or they should look like this. And then it occurred to me, we have over 1,000 experts, more than that, coming to who think about these issues every day. Let's develop a survey and let's get their input. And so we developed a survey, both online and a paper and pencil survey. It was facilitated through the Pride Action Tank, which is something I forgot to mention before, is that CRAP has now joined with the Pride Action Tank, which is affiliated with the AIDS Foundation. So the Pride Action Tank is an advocacy, policy, change-making group that is focused on health, safety, violence in the LGBT communities, and we're affiliated with their health initiatives.
Right,
So the
great.
Pride Action Tank helped us to distribute the surveys and to get feedback, and we collected 900 surveys from folks all over the country about their attitudes about which of these types of signs did we like. And tell me one of the signs that you're most familiar with seeing that's gender neutral. What sign are you most familiar with seeing?
I mean, something that says all genders, I guess.
Yeah. But most people really typically see the one that's a kind of
The half
person.
Yeah.
The half a man, woman dress.
I don't while on that one.
Yeah. Uniformly, no, we do not like that because there's no such of a person, right? And so folks just wanted to say, name what's in the room. Say this is a restroom or this is a toilet, right? It's wheelchair access, so they wanted to have a picture of wheelchair. It has a baby changing table, so they wanted that information there. And they just wanted it to show a picture of a toilet. And that was it. That was the the signage or the picture that got the most social acceptance.
That makes sense.
So we felt good about that, is that the decision that we were making in terms of what types of signs to be advocating for was researched and based on community input. So we felt good about that.
Yeah.
We feel good about the partnering and getting feedback from the business community, and I feel really, really good about the work that we're going to be moving into next is connecting with African American communities to talk about these issues and identify what resources and materials would be helpful in terms of increasing awareness and acceptability and among our community members.
Wonderful. And so how are you going to go about doing that?
So after we finish with our focus groups, we're planning to put together a report that includes what we've learned from the signs campaign, what we learned from the business communities, what we've learned from the focus groups, and put together a toolkit that would help to be a resource that would reside on Pride Action Tank's website that would be easily downloadable. Copies of the recommended sign, education materials that would explain to business owners and customers about the changes that might happen, and just to increase the dialogue exchange with people having tools in which to facilitate those conversations. So after we've done all the work in putting those materials together, Affinity Community Services has graciously agreed to allow us to have a town hall feedback session open to the community. We anticipate that will happen late summer and early fall. free to the community, and most importantly, that there will be lots of takeaway materials and resources that people can use to help change the situations in the environments that they're in.
Wonderful, wonderful. And so I also want to ask, so it sounds like things are going really well. There's a lot that has gone well. Is there anything, any challenges that you've come up with?
Mm-hmm. There are a couple of key challenges. The city ordinance itself, the building codes, back in some the old dusty language, actually specifies that restrooms need to be gendered. Now, if they have a certain capacity. Now, that not all restaurants and businesses are adhering to that, and there's been some efforts to work with the building commissioner to overturn that specific clause. Right? So that's been a challenge. And then the main challenge has been associated with discrimination and misinformation. There's been a lot of panic language, I would say, about women's safety because of men wearing dresses in the restrooms. And you know, as far as we have known, there's never been a single sort of documented case of a truly transgendered individual attacking a woman in the restroom, but we have ample documentation that gender nonconforming individuals are repeatedly harassed in restroom spaces, right? And so we just want to create an environment of safety and respect for all. And so that's why this work is really important.
That's, I mean, it's so great to say. I think that a lot of times we hear just the opposite, that cisgender women are at risk for violence, and that's actually not the case. And so, thank you so much for making that distinction.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome.
Before we sign off, I want to ask: is there anything, if someone wants to get involved, how can they get involved with this project?
Great. So we have on the Pride Action Tank as part of the AIDS Foundation. There's a website that has some information about the Chicago Restroom Access Project. You can contact us there. You can leave a message for me directly if you'd like through the number there on the screen at Affinity, if you would like to get in touch with me. Or you could look me up on the directory for the University of Illinois at Chicago, Dr. Alicia Matthews.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Dr. Matthews, such a pleasure to have you.
It's great to be here.
Thanks
so much.
Oh, thank you, thank you. And thank you so much, everyone. We are Affinity Community Services. If you want to find out more about us, or if you want to be part of CAN TV, you'd like to be on our show, or help answer phones, you can contact us at affinity95.org, or my email is imani, I-M-A-N-I, at affinity95.org. Thanks so much for being here, and we'll see you next time. Take care.